There are wars that make the history books, and then there are events so incomprehensibly lopsided, so ridiculous in scope and consequence, that historians throw up their hands, down a stiff drink, and label it human nonsense. This is one of those stories. The planet was called Threxus 9, which sounded like a throat infection and felt like one too. A scorched dustball spinning around a dying red dwarf, barely worth the air you exhaled on it. Officially, it was a disputed border moon between the ascended thermal accord of the Vok and the hyperstellar compact of Zix. Unofficially, it was a strategic outhouse, the kind of place you dumped troops when you wanted to pretend you were doing something important without actually risking anyone vital. Enter Private First Class Eli Vance, human, 5'9" on a good day, dishonorable discharge pending. Allegedly drunk at the time of planetary deployment, which, given what followed, may have been his most responsible decision that week. Vance was not supposed to be there alone. Originally, he was part of a joint species peacekeeping unit stationed in Fort Betok, a glorified concrete shoebox with laser turrets and a vending machine that only dispensed spicy algae paste. The other 59 members of the squad included 2 insectoid philosophers, 6 saurian commandos, a gelatinous sniper named Gooplet, and 1 deeply homesick Earth liaison who had taped a photo of his cat to his helmet. The peacekeeping mission lasted precisely 13 hours and 22 minutes before 3,000 Zixian shock troopers surrounded the fort, jamming comms, dropping a localized time displacement net, and announcing through a booming, multisyllabic ululation that everyone inside had exactly 7 minutes to surrender or be reduced to particulate mist. By the time those 7 minutes were up, Vance was the only one left standing, not because he was the best, certainly not because he was the bravest. He just happened to be in the latrine at the far end of the compound when the orbital neuroflares dropped. The rest of his unit, more disciplined, more noble, far more qualified, never saw it coming. Gooplet briefly melted in confusion. Vance exited the latrine mid-buckle, looked around at the rapidly smoldering aftermath, and muttered the phrase that would become the unofficial motto of the Threxus incident. "Oh, that's not ideal." From the viewpoint of Commander Yiltrex of Fire, Supreme Logistics Director of the Zixian Forward Aggression Spear, the situation was proceeding flawlessly. Fort Betok was neutralized. Resistance had crumpled. 3,000 of his best were arrayed in coordinated strike rings around the fortress, each unit perfectly calibrated to overlap kill zones, cut off retreat paths, and suppress incoming threats. It was a textbook operation, one he expected would be taught to future Zixian war pupae for generations. So imagine his confusion when the smoke cleared and a lone figure emerged, dragging a singed portal-latrine door as an improvised shield, still zipping up his combat trousers and yelling something about union-mandated breaks. "Cease fire," barked Yiltrex into the command relay, not out of mercy, but due to sheer confusion. The figure was human, alive, standing, alone. That violated 6 rules of galactic warfare and at least 2 laws of probability. Private First Class Eli Vance took one look at the wall of enemy troops, gleaming armor, plasma halberds, biometric targeting visors, and gave them a cheery salute with a hand not holding a toilet door. "Hey," he shouted, "anyone got a light?" What followed was not war, it was not diplomacy, it was something else. Something so jarringly chaotic, so fundamentally out of context for the Zixian war machine that the official battle logs redacted most of it under the heading, Incident, Human Contagion. The first mistake the Zixians made was assuming Vance was trying to escape. The second was underestimating the speed of a human soldier who's had 12 espresso rations, a full-body adrenaline surge, and an increasingly vague sense of mortality. Vance sprinted, not away from the enemy, but toward the nearest arc of their formation. His logic, such as it was, went something like this: "They'll never expect me to be this stupid." He was correct. The Zixians opened fire, but their hesitation was fatal. Their ranks were optimized for containment, not close-quarters panic. Vance ducked low, using the portal-latrine door like a medieval riot shield, deflecting scatterblasts, leaping over a stunned plasma gunner, and drop-kicking a battle medic directly into a sonic emitter. Then he disappeared into the ranks. Commander Yiltrex's eye stalks widened. Where did he go? Multiple squads answered with a mixture of static, screaming, and phrases like, "He took my exosuit," and "He weaponized the snack drone." Vance was in the thick of it now. He moved like a greased ferret on nitro, popping in and out of platoon formations, slapping antimatter grenades onto ammo crates, jamming pulse rifles with chewing gum, and at one point convincing an entire fireteam that he was their new morale officer by quoting motivational posters while stealing their boots. He didn't know the battle plan, he didn't care. What he had was chaos, caffeine, and the unstoppable conviction that if he kept doing the most unthinkable thing possible, no one would ever know how to respond. He was right. By hour 4, 37 Zixian platoons were chasing holographic decoys Vance had jury-rigged from leftover projector mines and pieces of his own uniform. At least 2 squads were actively fighting each other, convinced the other had been compromised by the human anomaly. Commander Yiltrex was beginning to doubt reality. There was one human, there is only one. Explain to me how one becomes everywhere. Uncertain, his second-in-command replied. He appears to have replaced our logistics AI with a small cactus in a helmet. That was accurate. Vance had stumbled into their mobile command tent, knocked out the central intelligence core with a wrench, and replaced it with a plant. It had been issuing orders for the past 40 minutes. Morale had never been higher. By sundown, only one soldier remained on the field. He walked out from a cloud of burning hoverbikes, singed, grinning, and wearing the rank insignia of at least 4 different Zixian units on his chest like a trophy rack. His name was Eli Vance, Private First Class, only survivor of Fort Betok. And the beginning of the worst week the galaxy would ever remember. By the time reinforcements arrived on Threxus 9, there was nothing left to reinforce. The dropships from Central Command descended cautiously, scanning for survivors, threats, or at least some coherent explanation for the dozen overlapping distress signals, jumbled battlefield telemetry, and a final comms burst that simply read, in all caps, "Situation unfathomable. Human HASBREACHED logic. Send help or holy water." What they found was devastation. 3,000 elite Zixian troops, missing, unconscious, misplaced, or in one particularly unfortunate case, trapped inside a fusion-powered portageon that had been duct-taped shut and labeled, "Do not feed." And standing atop a smoldering pile of wrecked mechs, scorched hover tanks, and extremely confused surrender flags, was one human soldier, sipping a stolen energy drink, wearing sunglasses he absolutely hadn't deployed with, and chewing on something that looked suspiciously like synthetic jerky made from alien ration cubes. "Glad you could finally make it," Eli Vance said, waving at the descending commander with the kind of casual swagger usually reserved for movie stars or people moments away from being court-martialed. General Hanlor, a 12-eyed crustacean built like a coral reef with authority issues, stepped out of the lead dropship, surveyed the battlefield, and said, "Explain. Now." Vance took another sip, burped once, and said, "All right, but you're gonna wanna sit down for this, and maybe pour yourself something strong." Instead of being arrested, Vance was promoted, temporarily, by mistake. The report filed by the Zixian survivors, a scattered, weeping, and often contradictory mess of mental breakdowns, fevered testimony, and artistic interpretive dance, painted Vance as a high-ranking human Black Ops saboteur, genetically engineered to dismantle order itself. According to one delirious captain, Vance spoke 17 languages, bled nanites, and stared into your soul until your sense of self dissolved into uncertainty. Human Command, realizing that this accident had caused their greatest victory in a decade, immediately did the most bureaucratically insane thing possible. They doubled down. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Vance," said an aide, slapping a fresh insignia on his uniform while nervously adjusting a collar covered in what was either alien slime or motivational stickers. "You're being redeployed to the front, effective immediately." "To where?" Vance asked. "Anywhere you want," the aide said, gulping. "Just please don't come back here." And so began the campaign of one. They gave him a ship, a crew, a designation so classified even the designation was redacted. His ship, officially named HRS Compliance, was unofficially renamed by Vance as the Sarcastic Disaster. It was an old diplomatic corvette retrofitted with stolen tech, redundant cup holders, and a cockpit seat made entirely of hover foam and petty vengeance. His crew consisted of the only 5 beings in the sector who either volunteered or had been tricked into it. Sergeant Kiki Tsung, ex-mercenary demolitions expert and certified psychopath, considered a liability until Vance offered her unlimited explosives and no supervision. Dr. Heshklin, a disgraced Vok biologist with a gambling problem, hoping that field deployment would distract from the fact that he genetically engineered a screaming plant that sued its owner. Clank, a reprogrammed enemy infiltration bot that had developed sarcasm and a nicotine addiction. Lieutenant Karen, an emotionless human bureaucrat embedded to ensure rules were followed and paperwork filed. She had already filed 6,000 violations before launch. Vance affectionately called her Fun Vacuum. And finally, Jerry, a floating alien orb who spoke only in vague prophecies and never moved under observation. No one knew who added him to the roster. Their mission was not officially a mission. On paper, the sarcastic disaster was listed as in maintenance. In reality, Vance and his crew were being fired at in 6 star systems simultaneously. He had declared war on inefficiency, corruption, and any enemy officer who tried to monologue before a battle. Which brings us to the Battle of Deneb VC. A peaceful trade negotiation between the Vok and the mechanical Kalern Empire had broken down after a debate over the ethics of sentient staplers. Vance was sent to mediate. Naturally, he misunderstood mediate as cause a distraction while we move real diplomats elsewhere. He arrived wearing a robe, sunglasses, and a hangover, kicked open the negotiation chamber doors, and shouted, "All right, you rusted toaster freaks and lizard accountants who wants to play truth or consequences." 2 hours later, both sides had declared a temporary truce out of sheer mutual horror. Vance had conducted his own version of diplomacy involving rigging the dessert table with mild hallucinogens, challenging a Kalern diplomat to a drinking contest, then revealing he was immune to their coolant-based alcohol, replacing the universal translator with a karaoke machine that converted speech into lyrics from late 21st century Earth punk rock, and finally reading both empires' terms of service aloud, then pointing out 46 loopholes that made war legally impossible for the next 7 years. The truce held, mostly because no one wanted to risk another encounter with the Chaos Envoy. Word spread. In a galaxy of precision, protocol, and predictable destruction, humanity had produced a statistical anomaly in combat boots. A man whose only tactics were impulse, confusion, and zero regard for established norms. The Zixian Empire issued a sector-wide alert. If encountered, do not engage. Observe from a safe distance. Pray it's someone else's problem. Which made Vance a legend. But legends come with targets. By the time Vance returned to the sarcastic disaster's hangar, wearing a borrowed cape, a smoking peace pipe, and the ceremonial crown of a species no one could now locate, there were 27 bounties on his head, a new diplomatic immunity clause created solely for him, and an entire rogues gallery of alien elites planning revenge. One of them succeeded, briefly. It happened on the moon of Skargalem during what was supposed to be a resupply mission. Vance was halfway through bartering 3 crates of bootleg Pop-Tarts for an orbital cloaking module when the ground opened beneath him. He fell into a dark chamber, metal walls, alien glyphs, a single spotlight. Waiting for him were 15 of the galaxy's deadliest assassins. And behind them stood Chronix the Unerring, a telepathic strategist and former Zixian warlord. The last time he met Vance, his entire command structure had been reclassified as missing due to clown-based sabotage. "Human," Chronix said with contempt. "I have studied your methods. I have predicted every move. There will be no chaos, no improvisation. This room is sealed, your weapons removed, your allies unaware. Your end is certain." Vance looked around, blinked. "Cool," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Impossible," Chronix sneered. "You were thoroughly searched. You have nothing." "Oh no," Vance said. "I mean, yeah, no weapons." He pulled out a half-eaten breakfast burrito. "But this has beans." He threw it at the wall. Unbeknownst to Chronix, the chamber had been constructed using recycled power conduits from an older Vok temple. known for being highly unstable when exposed to trace amounts of organic sulfur. The wall exploded, the chamber collapsed, the assassins screamed. And somewhere in the chaos, Eli Vance walked out, still chewing. In the aftermath of the Skargalem incident, classified by 5 governments and mythologized by 7, Eli Vance was officially declared a tactical singularity. A black hole of reason into which entire campaigns disappeared, along with standard operating procedure and the will to resist. The Zixians issued a formal statement to all known species. We renounce pursuit, we renounce vengeance, we renounce cause and effect as it pertains to this human, we advise total avoidance. Repeat, do not engage the anomaly. Naturally, the Quoron Collective interpreted this as a challenge. The Quorons, a hive-mind culture composed of gaseous intellects encased in floating alloy spheroids, prided themselves on rationalism, perfect unity, and an absolute intolerance for unpredictability. Their supreme algorithms had calculated every known threat across the galaxy, assigned it a probability of defeat index, PDI, and scheduled each encounter accordingly. Vance scored a PDI of infinity/error. Unacceptable, said Quoron Overmind Node Prime. Begin operation, reassert predictability. The plan was elegant. Deploy a null reality containment field, trap Vance in a perfectly simulated environment, analyze his chaos vectors, predict and neutralize, restore universal sanity. It failed in under 10 minutes. Vance, upon regaining consciousness inside the simulated environment, a replica of a 1980s Earth shopping mall, immediately set fire to a food court, started a flash mob, and hijacked the simulation's core to broadcast Free Pizza Friday to all Quoron units. 80% of their nodes went offline in confusion. 1 developed Jazz. He escaped riding a simulated escalator programmed to loop infinitely. The containment field imploded out of existential fatigue. Back on the sarcastic disaster, Vance was eating a grilled space cheese sandwich and playing Go Fish with Jerry the Orb, who had never once drawn a card. Clank hovered by, exhaling synthetic smoke from an unnecessary cyber cigarette. You were supposed to be gone for 6 hours, Clank said. You were gone for 12 minutes. Time's a construct, Vance replied. Also, I may have collapsed a thought realm. Can someone check if reality's flickering on the left side? Kiki poked her head in from the armory, holding what looked like a grenade duct-taped to a ferret. Are we being hunted again, or is it just Friday? It's both, said Vance, standing. Time for a field trip. Their next target was not a battlefield. It was a library. The Great Stellan Archive, to be exact, a megastructure orbiting a quiet moon, said to house every known law, treaty, technical manual, and hygiene regulation in the quadrant. It was run by the Greeblin bureaucratic order, a species of sentient moss who had achieved legal sapience through aggressive lobbying. Why go there? Because, somewhere in its 1.2 trillion pages of stored data, buried under 3 centuries of procedural subclauses, was a forgotten wartime loophole. A clause written during the human-Tromblin trade skirmish that technically made Eli Vance the provisional viceroy of half a galaxy. If found and activated, it would grant him command over 432 military fleets, 5 major trade routes, and a legally mandated cheese stipend. This seems ill-advised, muttered Lieutenant Karen, scanning the legal files with her ever-present clipboard drone. That's why we're doing it, said Vance, kicking open the archive's front gate. I intend to govern through aggressive absurdity. The Greeblins did not respond well. Dozens of mossy archivists surrounded them in a slow-moving bureaucratic shamble, armed with citation scrolls and audit flamethrowers. The sarcastic disaster crew split up, Vance heading straight for the central data stack, dodging regulation droids and filing ninjas. Yes, they were real, by hurling logic bombs like, if rules conflict with themselves, which one wins? He found the clause, naturally, wedged inside a footnote of a marginal note in a treaty about interstellar yogurt tariffs. The activation phrase, I do solemnly swear to uphold the dignified chaos of spontaneous jurisdiction. He said it. The galaxy shuddered. Back aboard the ship, a transmission lit up. A dozen Admiralty AIs blinked into view, saluted in confused unison, and said, awaiting your instructions, Lord Viceroy Anomaly. Vance blinked. Huh, that worked. Clank stared. What are you going to do with command of 432 fleets? Give them all opposite orders and see who finishes first, said Vance. He never got the chance. Because in the dark void of the border zones, something older was stirring. The Shroudkin had watched silently for millennia, a species so ancient, so abstract that most civilizations believed them to be myth. They existed in hyperspace currents between particles beyond comprehension. They had observed trillions of battles, billions of lives, but never in all their drifting eons had they seen anything like Eli Vance. He made them feel something they did not have a word for. It was the sensation of confusion wrapped in anticipation. It was the metaphysical equivalent of hearing a rubber chicken interrupt an opera. The Shroudkin convened, or rather, they metaphased their awareness clusters into adjacent probability nodes. He is broken, one said. He is beautiful, another replied. He must be tested. And so, without warning, without declaration, the sky above Vance's temporary throne world of bureaucratia 9 split open like a cosmic zipper, and the Shroudkin descended. They did not attack, they simply made reality incorrect. Staircases led sideways into feelings, colors smelled like numbers, all standard weapons became metaphorical. Jerry the Orb laughed for the first and last time. Vance stood in the chaos, arms wide, eyes gleaming. Finally, he said, someone I don't have to explain myself to. The confrontation was not a battle. It was a duel of concept versus conviction. The Shroudkin tried to unmake him by unraveling his narrative potential. He responded by declaring himself a subplot and refusing to cooperate with the main arc. They bombarded him with pure abstraction. He responded with interpretive dance and a speech about the geopolitical implications of duct tape. They summoned the formless. He beat it in rock, paper, scissors by choosing bureaucracy. The fight lasted 6 seconds, or 60 years, no one could tell. In the end, the Shroudkin retreated, not out of defeat, but because, for the first time in existence, they experienced déjà vu from the future and didn't want to see where it led. Back on the ship, Kiki was welding 2 plasma rifles together while Heshklin taught the potted cactus how to bluff in poker. Jerry hovered in silent reverence. Vance poured himself a drink. A fleet of confused admirals waited in orbit. Somewhere, the galaxy continued pretending it understood anything anymore. All right, team, Vance said, lifting his glass. Where are we utterly uninvited next? In the vast, whispering corridors of the High Tribunal of Unified Galactic Consensus, a fortress so bureaucratically entangled that it had its own time zone separate from local spacetime, an emergency summit had been called. Representatives from 91 species, 4 quantum-based intelligences, and 1 really persistent jellyfish gathered in absolute, simmering panic. The Reason stood, or rather lounged, on a rapidly melting throne made of confiscated paperwork and diplomatic immunity seals, somewhere on the orbital palace ship Compliance Defiant. His name was Viceroy Eli Vance. He had declared the week of unilateral treaties, during which he signed over 45,000 declarations, accords, truces, proclamations, and 1 interspecies prom invitation, all binding, none reviewed. The effects rippled across the stars. The Interstellar Trade Federation accidentally married itself to a moon. The neutral planet of Gorb was now a mandatory vacation spot for all known combatants. A legally recognized entity known as Steve the Sandwich had full voting rights on the Galactic Senate due to a form-filing loophole involving edible entities and notarized flavor. Worse yet, war had stopped, not from peace, from sheer procedural confusion. The Vance effect, muttered Chancellor Drog of the Veludari High Mind. He's weaponized bureaucracy against itself. It was too late for assassination, too late for court-martials. Every attempt to strip him of power had to be approved through the very system he now controlled. But power had never interested Eli Vance. Not really. It was what came next that excited him. Karen, he said, sipping something that tasted like rebellion and smelled faintly of coconut. Run the numbers again. Lieutenant Karen, her soul held together by spreadsheets and disdain, did not look up from her tablet. You have created 6 new sovereign micronations within your own capital ship, Vance. 3 of them have issued their own currencies. One is a religious movement based around your left boot, and I believe the Botanical Research Closet is currently demanding autonomy. Outstanding, said Vance. We're ahead of schedule. Schedule for what exactly? She snapped. He grinned, collapse followed by jazz. But not everyone was content to drown in absurdity. In the endless gulfs beyond galactic law, a new adversary emerged. They were known as the standardizers. Originally a hyper-advanced species of interdimensional regulators, the standardizers believed in one sacred truth: everything must fit. They despised entropy, abhorred variance, and had once eliminated an entire solar system because its planetary alignment formed an aesthetically displeasing triangle. The moment Eli Vance began unraveling systemic predictability, alarms sounded in their geometric fortress. He was classified as a Category X delta deviation vector, a walking misalignment, unacceptable, uncontainable, unfoldable. And so they came. No fleets, no ships, just one perfect rectangle, descending silently toward the compliance defiant like divine correction given form. Inside it stood the Enforcer, Form 9A, a being made entirely of regulation, wielding a blade forged from universally approved guidelines. It did not speak, it cited. Its voice was a shrill chorus of permissions denied. Eli Vance, it said, appearing aboard the bridge uninvited, you are in violation of Rule Structure 11.3, unauthorized use of temporal clauses to justify immediate disruption. Vance turned slowly in his chair, hands clasped. I represent 17 legal nations and a sentient food court. You'll need to file Form 12B just to threaten me. I am Form 12B, the Enforcer intoned. For the first time, Vance blinked, then smiled. Oh good, I've been meaning to refile you. The battle wasn't physical, it was procedural. Vance ducked a swing of the regulation blade by declaring a temporary adjournment. He countered with an emergency addendum and a retroactive veto of his own existence. Form 9A retaliated with a cease and desist, manifested as a gravitational anomaly. Every strike was met with a new form, a loophole, a spontaneous contradiction in terms. Clank shouted from the tactical console, "We're reaching terminal compliance velocity. We'll be audited into a black hole." "Redirect the clauses," Vance yelled, yanking the core charter out of the ship's legal matrix and wielding it like a riot shield. Kiki appeared in a puff of smoke and broken laws. "The escape pods just unionized. What the hell is going on?" "We're fighting bureaucracy with super bureaucracy," Vance said, "and losing slightly less than expected." The moment of victory came not through violence, but through inconsistency. Dr. Heshklin, high on inadvisable medical stimulants, wandered into the fray holding 2 different versions of the same handbook, each printed with opposing regulations. He handed one to the Enforcer. Form 9A froze. "Conflict detected," it whispered. "Self-inconsistency, core violation, please wait while I—" It folded, not in surrender, inwards. With a flash of violated logic and misfiled paradoxes, the standardizer vanished, sucked into its own contradiction. Silence. Then Vance turned to Karen. "File that under resolved through existential paperwork." She stared at him. "You've destabilized the entire concept of order. And yet we still get paid." But the storm wasn't over. Because as word spread of the defeat of the standardizers, something even more dangerous took notice. The audience. A mysterious, transdimensional species that observed reality as entertainment, tuning in across probability channels. They thrived on drama, tension, escalation. When stories got too strange, too wild, too unpredictable, they paid attention. Now Eli Vance had their full viewership. And that meant the stakes had just become performative. One day after the standardizer event, a theater appeared in orbit. Just appeared. A velvet-trapped megastructure adorned with lights, balconies, and a marquee that read, Live, one human vs the entire galactic meta-narrative. Tickets were sold, across time, across dimensions. The sarcastic disaster was invited, forcibly, with gravity tethers made of expectation. "Do we have a plan?" Clank asked, watching as spotlights began scanning them from impossible angles. Vance stretched, cracked his knuckles, and put on a cape that hadn't existed 30 seconds prior. "Of course we improvise," loudly. Kiki handed him a plasma mic. "Let's make it weird." And as the curtain rose, Eli Vance stepped onto the stage. Not a stage of wood and lights, a stage of cause and effect, of conflict and resolution, of story and counterstory. The audience lined in. The game was no longer war. It was narrative. And Eli Vance was about to hijack the plot itself. The theater of reality was crowded, not with people. No, this audience was stranger. They were concept beings from timelines that never occurred, entities of raw genre, living cliches, sentient tropes in formal wear. One wore a monocle and whispered foreshadowing with every sip of phantom wine. Another kept betting loudly on inevitable tragedy, despite being repeatedly wrong. They were here to see a human. One man, Eli Vance, the unpredictable, the improviser, the walking breach of cause and effect. He stood center stage on the Narratium, a floating, fifth-dimensional performance platform that pulsed with thematic pressure and metaphysical orchestration. Around him spun the rules, the tropes, arcs, expectations of narrative order, and the ones who wrote them. The conductor, a swirling mass of quills, masks, and old screenplay drafts, materialized with a theatrical puff of meaning. "Eli Vance," it intoned, "you stand accused of reckless deviation, thematic sabotage, and weaponized absurdity." Vance adjusted his lapel, despite not wearing a jacket. "Cool, do I get a lawyer, or just the opportunity to throw a flaming chair?" "This is a trial of narrative," the conductor declared. "The stakes are your place in existence. If your story collapses, so do you." Vance stepped forward, arms outstretched. "Then let's make it a damn good story." The audience roared, some with mouths, others with interpretive sonatas. The trial began. First came the hero's call to action, a scenario designed to bait him into nobility, sacrifice, the traditional beginning of a redemptive arc. Instead, Vance bribed the call with a sandwich and told it to leave a voicemail. Then came the moral dilemma, where a planet was held hostage. Either he surrendered or millions died. He gave the hostage-takers a spreadsheet showing that if they waited 10 minutes, the planet's lease would expire and legally revert to a free-for-all salvage zone. They imploded from contractual doubt. Next, the betrayal, scripted and cast without his input. Clank entered the scene, glitching, eyes red. "I've been reprogrammed," the bot droned. "I must terminate you." Vance didn't blink, "Not before your dramatic monologue." Clank paused. He loved monologues. He launched into one. Vance clapped. Kiki, watching from the wings, started playing a battle anthem on a stolen saxophone. By the end of Clank's speech, he had won an award and forgotten his orders. "Still loyal," the bot said proudly. The script screamed in pain. Somewhere backstage, the plot collapsed into a pile of confused foreshadowing and an underused love subplot that never had a chance. The conductor grew desperate. "You cannot win," it hissed. "This is structure. You must be part of something greater, a hero, a villain, a point." Vance stepped to the edge of the stage, staring directly into the audience, into the void. "I'm not your hero, I'm not your villain. I'm the guy who shows up uninvited, eats the plot, steals the props, and rewrites the climax using crayons." He snapped his fingers. Karen emerged in full legal regalia, holding a single form, stamped, signed, and certified. "This document," she said coldly, "declares Eli Vance a sovereign narrative construct with full meta-jurisdiction. He's not in the story anymore. He is the story." The stage split. The curtains caught fire. Every arc collapsed inward. Every expected ending crumbled like soggy toast under existential butter. The audience gasped in collective, unrehearsed unity. The conductor reeled, unraveling. No, that's not allowed. Vance grinned. That's the point. The platform exploded into white space. Possibility, blank pages, the ultimate freedom, no script. And in that void, he walked away. One man, one human, no arc needed. The galaxy didn't know what hit it. Later, weeks, years, millennia. Depending on how you measured time through multiversal jazz, the reports would vary. Some said he disappeared into legend. Some said he founded a pirate radio station inside a black hole. Some claimed to have seen a man wearing sunglasses and an officer's jacket with 15 different insignias, solving a border dispute by teaching both sides to play dodgeball. But one thing every account agrees on. At Threxus 9, he was surrounded by 3,000 troops. No reinforcements, no hope. And only one survivor walked away. Shaking, not because of fear, but because he was laughing too hard to stand still.